I don't want to give too many details, because I no longer know who to trust and who to avoid speaking to. I'll say that my name is Nora, and at the time of what I'm going to tell, I had just turned 18. Back then, I lived in a small town in northeastern Argentina. One of those places where the few houses get lost in the fields and are barely visible from the roads. It's where everyone knows everyone, and they know every aspect of their neighbors' lives. It's a town where few leave, but I'm grateful to belong to that group. In the countryside, there are myths and legends aplenty, which vary as you travel through different towns. Those that compel you to follow certain traditions or avoid certain actions, or else an evil being will visit you. Of course, many people, especially the older folks, believed in these stories. But when I was little, I couldn't help but see all the legends for what they were. Just stories. It was common for us to gather for dinner with the whole family, which was largely thanks to my many uncles and cousins. The family would eat barbecue and drink beer, and then there would be guitar strumming. My grandfather, a payador in his spare time, would tell us stories of those encounters to the rhythm of the strings, and I did nothing but clap or follow the lyrics with excitement. No gnome scared me. I knew I wouldn't encounter some monster in the shape of a hairy animal. And I even learned to see with total normality the remains of dark rituals on the sides of the roads, arts that were not viewed so badly by locals. I observed all this more as a curiosity rather than something evil, and I even enjoyed thinking that I might have a paranormal encounter one day. God, how foolish I was. One of all those legends was known throughout the country. The evil light, they call it. According to the story, it happens when someone dies in the countryside, and their poor soul does not receive a proper Christian burial, destined to wander in sorrow and ask for help from humans. It wasn't a nice request, of course, as it was said that the evil light could make livestock, and even humans, disappear. It was a legend that required some fear, or at least some respect, for the rest of the dead. That was why the whole town was on alert when one of the 5,000 souls living there suddenly disappeared. Sometimes when I hear a scream in the street, I still tremble remembering the chants of Pedro throughout the place. I don't remember his last name, but I do remember he was one of the town's shopkeepers. A good man whose addiction to liquor and gambling led to bankruptcy. A somewhat foretold disappearance perhaps, but no less mysterious for that. At the time, I didn't pay much attention to the fact that the police had strictly forbid us from wandering the fields until the investigation was resolved and Pedro's body was found. Not to spoil the forensic analysis, was what they claimed, and we complied. No town resident would go near. Let's camp out in the open our last night together. Let's see if that evil light really exists. It might seem that phrase was said by a tourist, given what I've told you so far. But no, it was uttered by Laura, my best friend, always a step braver and more daring than I was. I remember when she proposed it on the school stairs, the same usual group listening to her. Juan, David, Valentina, her, and myself. We'd finished school, and little by little, we would all start moving to bigger cities to seek better opportunities than being a farmer or a rancher. There were no arguments against it, as I recall, not even mine, as interfering with the investigation was a remote idea, and as I said, I wasn't scared of those legends. The time would be that same Friday, midnight. In a small town at that hour, everybody is sleeping, recharging their energy before the roosters crow at dawn. I packed up water and a flashlight, put on comfortable clothes, and left my room with the backpack on my shoulders. I was about to exit the house Wait, I thought, as I touched the door handle. I looked back and went back to my room. I headed straight to my bedside table, and from one of the drawers I took out a small wooden box. Sliding the lid open, I noticed what I was looking for. A rectangular amulet, half a meter tall, with Christian crosses and other indecipherable symbols engraved into it. I took it with me. As I lifted it, I saw underneath the note my grandfather had left me when he entrusted it to me, months before passing away. May this amulet always accompany you. If you feel in danger, hold it tight. You will need it. My mind processed the words again. When my grandfather played the guitar, there it was. He would place it on the table or pin it near his chest before reciting his verses about the legends. Could it be that... Nonsense. I wasn't afraid of anything. But well, it was better to be safe than sorry. So I pinned the amulet to my shirt and headed to the meeting point. The summer night felt warm on my skin. The insects bounced between us like raindrops, and the excitement was palpable. The 5 of us ventured into the fields, and after a while of walking, we decided to set up camp. We made a small fire, and the warmth prompted us to start drinking the beers David had brought. Don't give me that look. It was common in the area, and I think it was that which made us sleep deeply while watching the beautiful starry night sky. Mook. Suddenly, Laura's voice woke me up from my sleep, as well as the rest of the group. We left our positions to find her astonished. Her eyes looked as if they were about to pop from their sockets. It was like she had seen a ghost. I turned my head to where she was focusing her gaze. She was facing the rural horizon. It wasn't a ghost. It was a light. A light that indeed looked like a ghost, far, far away. Idiot, that's definitely a truck, Juan protested. And he was right. It was a very faint glow, barely perceptible, typical of the trucks that passed by the road to the south. I remember the 3 boys laughing at her, and she started to blush with embarrassment as she tried to defend herself. I'm not sure why, but I didn't laugh. I only recall a chill running down my spine right into my arms. I tried to hold her gaze, but my instincts told me otherwise. It's already 5. We have to go back, or they'll catch us. It took me a few seconds to process that sentence. It was my friend's laughter that finally pulled me away from that glow, making me look back, horrified to see that they'd already taken their backpacks and ran off. Hey, wait, I called. I grabbed my things, leaving behind only the embers of the fire, and pursued my friends among the trees. I took one last look back. I don't know if it was my imagination, but that glow seemed bigger. Come on, they shouted ahead of me. I tried to follow them clumsily, but I was the least physically fit of the 5 of us. In the summer, roosters detected the sun around 5:30, but the landscape was still shrouded in complete darkness. That's why it was hard for me to move through the vegetation, having bumped into obstacles several times already. My only guide was their voices. Sometimes they were close, other times distant. I asked them loudly to wait several times, but if they managed to hear me, it didn't show. Guys, I called again before my foot hit a heavy branch on the ground, knocking me down. I quickly shook off the mud and stood up. My knees were somewhat sore, but the voices were now more distant. But still, I could see that light through the trees. It's not real, Nora, I told myself. But it seemed very real. My grandfather's nighttime guitar playing came back to my mind. But now what he recounted was not something to laugh at with cousins. Each pluck of his strings sent a shiver through the rest of my body, and I still don't understand how I didn't drop dead right there. I kept running, now almost blind, not even knowing where I'd last heard their voices. But if they were running from the glow, I simply had to go in the opposite direction. I dodged trees, bushes, weeds, with the speed the situation forced me to have. "Guys, please," I cried. My screams no longer got an answer, but I kept trying to find one. I ran, and the glow seemed closer. I ran, and it got brighter. I was not making any distance. Then I bumped into another branch. This time, I rolled down the uneven terrain until I fell several meters down a hill. I was caught on a tree, firmly stopping me. I groaned, but I had no time to pay attention to the pain. I tried to sit up as best I could, taking out my flashlight. The forest had become completely dark. There were no traces of light anywhere. Maybe I was just paranoid. But maybe. "Don't do it, please." I jumped from my spot, my heart in my throat and every nerve on edge from that whisper that sounded like it came from a suffering child. I fell a few meters. I looked at what was behind me, and there it was. I must have screamed too much, although I don't know for how long, probably long enough for my friends, along with the police, to find me. I have fuzzy memories of what happened in the following hours. They rescued me. My parents hugged me a lot. They cried. And somehow, I found out in that very place, they'd found Pedro's body. Surely that was what had made me panic, along with my friends leaving me behind. Not in evil light that, according to the police, didn't even exist. Police who oddly wore the same amulets my grandfather had left me. My grandfather himself, who had been a police officer. Soon after, I moved to Buenos Aires to study. I felt an inexplicable peace by moving away from that place, which I could never see the same way again. My own home felt different, and my confusion was greater when I had the amulet examined by a priest. He seemed terrified of it, even bathed it in holy water and prayed for about an hour. He never wanted to tell me what he found inside. And I never went back, nor do I plan to. Not even for David's funeral, the only one who had stayed there to take care of the livestock. He died in the middle of the field and was not discovered for months. It was a situation similar to Pedro's. Although my friend had no debts, he felt he was constantly being watched by someone. He was the one who wanted to ask for help and didn't make it. To this day, I don't know for sure what happened, although I could imagine. I only know that the cold wind and distant lights sometimes remind me of a phrase. If I go back, I'd probably be next. The story I'm about to share with you happened to a friend of mine, and to this day, it gives him chills whenever he recounts it. Through this tale, we'll be taken to a land remote but beautiful. For anonymity's sake, I won't name the town specifically, and I'll only mention it's a small yet famous town in Greece. One place that my friend used to, and still to this day, visits quite a lot. The encounter happened approximately 11 years ago, during one summer season, back when my friend Kay was still a young kid, breezing through life with no care in the world. Like every kid his age, when summer rolled around and school stopped being a nuisance, he and his parents would travel to that town to visit Kay's grandma. She lived alone in an old but respectable house in the outskirts. Naturally, Kay, after having visited plenty of times before, had become fast friends with the kids in the town, especially one in particular. I'll refer to him as Jay. Kay and Jay spent day after day of summer playing around the town square, playing pranks on locals and making childhood memories, the likes of which all kids make during those tranquil months of the year. But one memory, one event, will stand out above the rest. Not because it was extremely funny or undeniably enjoyable, but because it speaks of something unexplained, something foreign. In that famous town of Greece approximately 80 years ago, a brutal event occurred during the first December of Greece's participation in World War II. That atrocity was carried out by the German army, who systematically destroyed several villages and towns in the region, killing inhabitants and burning homes as they moved towards the town we speak of. Upon arriving on December 13, 1943, the Germans gathered all the inhabitants in the local school, while proceeding to separate the women and children from the men and boys over the age of 12. And in all too cruel decision, the men and boys were taken to a hillside near the town. There they were mercilessly machine-gunned en masse. Despite the very few that managed to survive, either by pretending to be dead or managing to run away, almost 500 people lost their lives in a matter of seconds. After the executions, the Germans set fire to the town, destroying everything they could find. The school, along with many other buildings, were burned down as well, and only by a miracle did the women and children manage to escape the flames. The survivors were left to deal with the devastating aftermath, including burying the dead and rebuilding their lives from the ruins. Of course, it's natural that such an event would scar an entire nation, let alone a small town. That's why, after the war, a monument was built up on the hill where all those men and boys were killed. It was a tranquil place, Kay thought, every time he visited it. A hill overlooking the town, greenery all around, and he did that quite often, in fact, especially during late hours. In a town such as this one, there were not many things to look out for, if any. Children roaming around unattended was the norm, so Kay and Jay took that liberty a bit too far. During the last days of Kay's stay in the town for summer, the two friends decided it would be quite adventurous to visit that hill, named the Cross, especially late. Kay's parents weren't and still aren't strict at all, and curfew for him was not a problem. Jay's parents would pose a problem, however, Jay himself didn't think so. In the end, slipping out seemed to be a breeze. As the two friends walked towards the hill in the dead of the night, Kay could feel the atmosphere in the outskirts. It was as tranquil as ever. No cars, no people, no disturbances anywhere. Just him, his friend, and the night sky. It filled him with a sense of adventure he couldn't quite describe. Yet as the kids reached the slope and laid down their backpacks and extremely outdated cell phones for some music, the feeling washing over Kay a minute prior vanished, as if it was never there. Jay had grown silent too, probably engrossed in the views and tranquility. A silence stretched and stretched, causing Kay to feel uneasy. It was like he knew they weren't alone. The Cross was always open to the public, as far as they knew. But nobody could be here at this hour, right? They weren't even trespassing or anything, and yet they felt out of place. Kay gulped at the realization and looked around. The story of that tragedy was no news to him, and it was fair to say he had heard it from his grandma more times than he could count. She was only 5 years old back then, but the stories recounted to her by relatives always stayed fresh and sharp enough for storytelling. Despite knowing about the execution and the unjust deaths of 500 souls, Kay never associated that hill with regret or pain. It had never felt off before, like it did now. As his thoughts began to drift, Jay, ever the chatterbox, whipped his head around. "What are you looking at?" Kay stood frozen, and it didn't take long for Jay to notice. His eyes widened, body unmoving and stiff. And there it was. The figure of a man, clear as day, walking slowly yet deliberately towards the two boys. He was as plain as anyone else in the time, but wore a very outdated hat, the likes of which Jay's grandfather never parted with. The two kids dared not breathe as they watched the man make his way towards them, absolutely frozen in shock. It was a man, a normal man, but what was he doing here at this hour? Kay's mind was a mess, producing 1,000 thoughts at once, and at the same time, processing none. That's when Jay got up from his position and cried out like a wounded cat, grabbing his friend as he ran. "Run!" The two kids dashed down the hill blindly, only by miracle avoiding tripping over themselves or over some loose branch. Heaving and panting, they stopped at the foot of the hill and turned back to look in relief. He didn't follow us. Who even was that? Jay and Kay spoke in a frenzy, their hearts racing. When the two of them managed to catch their breaths, Jay, who for some reason had regained his vigor, turned back to his friend and said, "Do you think we saw a ghost?" Kay hesitated, thinking back to the visage of the man. He looked normal, he finally said, although barely convincing even himself. "Yeah, I guess he did." As the two walked back home, silently deciding that was enough, Jay turned on his heel and waved. "See you tomorrow. I better get back before they catch on to me and lock me up till you leave." Kay wanted to chuckle at his friend's nonchalant attitude, but he couldn't find the courage. How was he so calm? Maybe that man really was normal, he nodded, and went back home too. The next morning, everything seemed the same as ever, and while Jay acted normally when talking to the other kids in the square, Kay knew last night wouldn't be the end of their adventure. "Hey, want to go back there tonight?" Sure enough, there was the proposal. Kay wanted to side his danger-ignorant friend, but he knew better than to complain. This was Jay after all. Did he really want to get possessed that bad? "Nope, nobody's going to get possessed." Jay shook his head. "We might not have seen a ghost after all." Kay raised an eyebrow, amused that Jay had left his weird fixations aside for once. "And who was that if not a ghost?" "Well, there must be an attendant around the monument. There is the chapel close by too, right?" Kay was impressed, seeing as how his friend brought up a valid argument instead of relying on the paranormal to boost their adrenaline. "Could be, but how do we know if it is the attendant?" "We'll figure that out as we go. Let's just meet up around here later tonight, okay?" Kay knew it was rather stupid to go back, yet he could also feel the sense of adventure from yesterday rising within him once more. "Okay, let's do it." The two boys had an agreement, and the plan was sealed. Later that night, Kay and Jay climbed up the hill just like they did the day prior, albeit a little more cautiously. Nevertheless, they reached their destination all the same. At this time, upon arriving, "There," Jay whispered, pointing at the figure of the man. It was, in fact, the same man they'd seen yesterday. Kay's heart pounded. No doubt Jay's did too, but the two boys inched closer nonetheless. They had decided, after all, that they would try to take a closer look at the man, if he didn't seem hostile towards them. And he didn't. Truth be told, as Kay got closer and closer to the man seemed almost serene. He was sitting down in the grass, looking out in the open, not a care in the world. Upon closer inspection, his clothes, although typical of the folk in such a small town, seemed rather old, and his hat even more so. As soon as Jay decided that was close enough, he swallowed down the lump in his throat and spoke. Hello? There was a brief pause as he caught his breath. Do you work here? Upon hearing that question, the man finally turned towards the kid, his face simple and his expression tranquil. Beneath his eyes, though, there was something almost sad, melancholic. I've worked everywhere around these parts, was his answer, simple and short. At first it seemed evasive, but it was clear through his tone that he didn't intend to dodge the subject. He only seemed disconnected, like he didn't want to be there, but at the same time, he didn't know where else to go. Naturally, the two kids did not expect such a reply, and they stopped to think for a moment. Are you always here? Or just at night? Jay asked again, trying to get the same answer in a roundabout way. I need to go back to my wife and kids soon. When the man spoke again, Kay's heart seemed like it had frozen in place. He couldn't explain why, but his hair stood up all at once, chills coursing through his body. We need to leave too. Kay spoke softly towards Jay, backing a few steps away and causing Jay to turn and look. He was hesitant, judging by the look he had in his eyes, but ultimately pressed on. Are you from around here? I am. Always have been. The man replied, this time merely looking ahead towards the town, a longing, empty gaze piercing through the night all the way to the few lights in town. Are we disturbing you? Jay's last question left his throat unexpectedly, his eyes almost closing in anticipation. They did. Without another word, Jay's body moved the same way as Kay's as the kids shuffled away, their eyes wide and skin pale. When had the air grown so thick? The man didn't turn to look at them as they left. His eyes stayed fixed forward, his body unmoving. When they were out of sight, Kay and Jay could not hold back any longer and ran down the cliff back towards town, barely managing not to scream. When the two parted ways, as always, even the energetic Jay had no snarky comment to make. They bid each other goodnight and went off on their way. Thank God they lived so close by, Kay thought, after realizing what kind of dread he'd have to endure if he walked in the dark all alone for long. Probably the same feeling of dread that did not leave him all throughout the night. The tranquil town didn't seem so peaceful in Kay's eyes anymore. The night seemed more eerie than ever, and the cross even more so. The next morning, Kay talked about the cross with his grandmother, whose expression was that of more than just reprimand. Why did you go up there so late? What did you see? Kay explained everything. The man, the atmosphere, his words. That chilling feeling at the end, but something just wasn't right. And that was when her words shattered all doubt within the young boy. There is no attendant up there. There's no man that would go up there at night besides you silly kids. Then what was it? Kay wanted to ask. But something told him he already knew the answer to that. All those men 80 years ago left behind many things. Families, wealth, all were taken away from them so unjustly. It's only natural they feel lost, even after death. Kay was expecting his grandmother to explain to him how ghosts weren't real, how he was hallucinating, or something like that. But instead, all her words did was reaffirm what he himself had deduced. That man should not have been there, because that man was dead. That man could not be anywhere else than the cross because he could never leave and has never left. A couple of days later, Kay left alongside his parents to start up another school year in the city he grew up in. He and Jay spent a few more summers together and made countless other memories. Years later, Kay even visited the Cross Monument once again and kept going back to enjoy the view. But since that day, he always remembers to hold up a prayer for those that left and for those that couldn't. When I was younger, around 12 years old, my parents booked a 4-night stay at a log cabin somewhere in California with my grandma. The events that occurred scarred me for life. I felt the crisp air on my face as I opened the car door. I looked at the woods around me, and I started towards the cabin door. My mother called after me, "Ed, sweetie, why don't you go up to your room and unpack?" When I opened the cabin door, I was surprised at the sudden creak it made. Just inside was a large space with a sofa parked in front of a flat-screen TV. There was a kitchen attached to the living room. There was a counter lined with bar stools. I walked up the stairs and past the bathroom. Down the hallway, I entered the room I was supposed to be staying in. And I screamed. Because there, right in the middle of the floor, was a dead rat. It looked like something had been gnawing on it. Its insides had been smeared all over. I bolted down the stairs, seeing my dad wheeling my grandma's wheelchair into the cabin. "Dad, there's a dead rat in my room!" I practically screamed. "If you're old enough, why don't you just go clean it up?" I did just that. I ended up using an entire paper towel roll and a can of Lysol to clean that thing up. It was around 6 p.m. when my mom made some mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs. That was my favorite at the time. I was walking to the couch Grandma was next to with my bowl when I noticed something. There was a trap door in the middle of the room. Not sure how that got past me earlier. "Mom, what's this door doing here?" I asked my mother. Probably access to the crawl space. They used to keep floods from coming into the cabin." I sat down on the couch and turned on the TV, satisfied with that answer. I vividly remember how much I liked the food that night. It was great. And before long, it was time for bed. My dad had told me in the car how much fishing and kayaking we were going to do, and I was super excited. I got into my bed and fell asleep fast, the warm covers making it that much easier. Around midnight, I think, I woke up to this sound of shuffling. I stepped out of my room, leaving the door slightly ajar. As I peered into the dusty hall, I noticed nothing but the moonlit shadows dancing on the wall. The shuffling sound continued as I crept down the stairs leading to the living room. I placed my ear to the floor, and just as I suspected, these sounds were coming from under the floorboards. Dread washed over me as the fear of something scurrying around under there hit me. Being the idiot I was, I thought I could take whatever was down there. So I grabbed my flashlight and decided to go find it. I opened up the trapdoor. Maybe a dozen rats scattered as I climbed down into the cold, damp space. It was huge, reminding me disturbingly of a maze. I crawled deeper. I can't tell if I was being really brave or really stupid, but I crawled until I reached a dimly lit corner about 10 feet in front of me. Suddenly there was movement, and I shone my flashlight at the source. There was a figure, a silhouette with long arms and pale skin, hunched down in the corner. Its eyes reflected white off my flashlight. I was completely stunned as the thing started to screech. Looking back, I noticed the flashlight probably hurt its eyes and startled it. You better believe I turned myself right around I began to speed crawl as fast as I could. I glanced back at one point, only once, to see that thing following me, and quickly, wrapping long fingers around the support beams to help it along. I could only assume that this thing had been feeding off the rats, and that I had found its leftovers in my room. If it could do something like that to a rat, I was terrified at the thought of what it could do to me. I was beginning to think I was lost, with how long it was taking me to get back to the trap door, and with every foot I moved, that thing was gaining on me. I thought all hope was lost, until I finally saw the trap door coming up. As soon as I reached it, I tackled it open and scrambled out. I felt something beginning to grab at me, and I swear I felt hot breath. I kicked and slammed the trapdoor closed. Something began to claw and push at it on the other side, so I threw my body on top of the door. After a while, the thrashing and struggling stopped. I then bolted upstairs to my parents' room, and I began to bang on the door, screaming, "Dad! Mom!" My father groggily opened the door, asking what in the world I was doing. I tried to explain. "Dad, we have to go. There's something trying to get in the house." But he didn't believe me. I tried to explain that it wasn't a nightmare, but my efforts were pointless. I was sent to my bedroom, where I did not sleep a wink. I was too scared. The following morning, I ate my breakfast and went out onto the lake with my dad. He got the fishing rod set up, and we got on this little boat. I didn't catch any fish, but I was still able to enjoy spending time with my father. Anything to get my mind off of last night's events. Eventually, dawn turned to dusk, and we roasted up some marshmallows, an activity both Grandma and Mom loved. They used to go camping when my mother was younger. The s'mores I made were delicious, perfectly gooey. It was finally bedtime again, but I was terrified of the thought of that creature trying to hurt my family. I didn't think I could sleep that night, but somehow, some way, I was able to doze off. I awoke at some point, hearing the unmistakable sound of the trap door creaking open. My heart sank into my chest as a sense of dread like no other hit me. Right then, I heard the sound of cupboards in the kitchen slamming open and shut. I wondered if it was that thing looking for me. I started to hyperventilate as I heard the steps creaking. Was my door locked? Could it even open doors? Then again, it had opened the trap door. Hundreds of questions went through my mind, but to no avail. I had zero answers. I heard scratching sounds coming from the hallway. Then the doorknob jiggled, and I held my breath. Suddenly everything stopped as I heard another door opening. My dad then shouted, "Get on out of here!" Then there was this awful ear-splitting screech and shattering glass. I bolted to my door, and I saw my dad standing just outside his doorway with his fishing knife. I looked to my right. There was a trail of blood leading to a broken window. That same night, we packed our things, and we left the cabin without a word. My family has not been anywhere near the woods since. Keep safe as best you can, everyone. If you hear strange noises at a new place, don't hesitate to run or to call the police. You never know what lies near you, or rather, beneath you. I want to share a few of my experiences with you. This is the first. In 1991, when I was 8 years old, living in a rural forest in Finland, it was time for our annual field trip with the whole school. As the area was more rural and in the middle of nowhere, we had only 9 students at the whole school, and I'm including myself in that. Because it would be needless to get a whole bus for a field trip for only 2 teachers and 9 students, parents and other adults were also welcomed to our field trip, albeit they paid to go. Our destination was the Olavinlinna Castle, over a 3-hour drive away in a town called Savonlinna. The castle was built in the mid-15th century, when Finland was still part of Sweden, to protect the nation against the neighboring country, Russia. There were no inhabitants in the area, but the Swedish government forced Finnish people to move into the area to build the castle the royal crown wanted. And that's how Savonlinna came to be. Nowadays, it's also known for its annual opera festival, which is one of the biggest in Europe. I had never been further than 100 kilometers, or about 55 miles, away from home, so I was excited for the trip. The day was extremely sunny and nicely warm when we arrived at Olavinlinna Castle. The tour guide showed us around the castle, telling us the famous legend of Olavinlinna. I'll share it with you. Long, long ago, a young maiden lived in the castle. She fell in love with an enemy Russian soldier, and whenever they had a chance, they met in secrecy. One day, after this love affair had been going on for some time, the soldier asked if they could meet in secrecy in the darkness of the night inside the castle. The young woman agreed. When the night fell, she went to the main gate to let her lover inside. But this time, he wasn't alone. The entire Russian army was waiting there. The men stormed the castle, but their invasion was not successful, and they were driven away. This young woman, albeit completely innocent, was sentenced to be killed for treason. She begged for mercy, but that was in vain. She would be buried alive inside one of the castle's walls. Later, as a sign of her innocence, a rowan tree grew out of her heart and through the wall. This is a story tour guides tell to all the visitors, and it's also featured on Olavinlinna's official webpage. Of course, on our field trip, we heard the same story, while standing in the castle's inner circular yard. Next to me stood a couple I didn't know, and I heard them gasp, "Oh wow, look at that, it's so high." I turned to look at what they were staring at, with their craned necks, and I saw a rowan tree. It was growing from the castle's wall, just like in that legend. It was very green and lush, a vibrant-looking tree, growing around midway on the wall. It rattled my little kid brain. I kept staring at it intensely, thinking, how on earth can a tree grow from out of the wall? How did a seed even get in there? Where would it get its nutrients? All sorts of questions ran on in my head, because what I was seeing made no sense to me. Apparently, it also made no sense to this unknown couple on my right either, because they too were fixated on the tree. We all stared at it, this most lively, healthiest, luscious-looking little tree we've ever seen, for many, many minutes, until it was time to follow the tour guide to our next destination inside the castle. Fast forward, I'm 17 now. My best friend had applied to Savonlinna Art and Music High School and was accepted in, so her family moved there. It was the first summer break for her when I came to visit. We agreed that we should visit the medieval castle. I told my friend that I really wanted to see the rowan tree again. It was one of the best things I'd ever seen. When we made our way inside the castle, we noticed the tour group was about to start their journey with the guide. We figured we would head inside the castle first, before the group left, so that we weren't in their way and the group won't block our access to different areas of the castle either. Hurrying in, we made our way deeper into the castle, and trust me when I say we didn't leave any single nook or cranny unchecked. If it wasn't chained or marked with no trespassing or personnel only signs, we went in. We spent maybe an hour inside the castle, but we were unable to find the rowan tree. I wondered to my friend if the tree had fallen down, or maybe it had been cut down because of rotting, causing a safety hazard. I mean, the tree was growing around the middle of a very high castle wall. If it had fallen on someone's head, they'd be dead, or at least severely injured. We caught up with the tour guide at the top of one of the castle towers. The tour guide was telling her visitors the story of the maiden and the rowan tree, so my best friend and I decided to eavesdrop on the story. We pretended to be watching the scenery stretching over the lake surrounding the castle, when in reality, we kept concentrating on the tour guide's voice. The tour guide said that there had indeed been a rowan tree, which had grown out from the castle's wall. But unfortunately, it had come down in an extremely bad storm in the 1950s. Shocked, I turned to look at my friend and gasped to her under my breath so that no one else could hear me. "That can't be true. I saw the tree in the 90s. What does she mean it fell down in the 50s? I was sure that the castle staff had messed up with the tree. Maybe they'd accidentally killed it. Then they had to come up with some ridiculous story of a storm. However, when I later searched for more information of the rowan tree and the castle, the tour guide had spoken the truth. The tree had indeed come down in the mid-50s in a very heavy storm, which had ripped the poor tree from the wall. The castle's webpage also confirmed this information. Not only that, but I also found the only surviving photo of the said rowan tree. It had been taken 2 years prior to its demise. It was nothing like the one I'd seen in 1991 with that unknown couple. The tree we had seen was lush and vibrant, round and bushy, whereas the tree in the photo was just a few wimpy sticks coming out of the wall. Besides, it was in the wrong place, growing out from the edge of the castle's roof, whereas the tree we'd seen was on a castle's wall. I went on to search for more information of any other known trees which may have grown in the castle, but there was none. Only this wimpy, sad excuse of a rowan, which itself was such a rare phenomenon that it still lives in the castle's legends. But the castle staff was so excited for a few sticks, they wouldn't have missed a grown tree, albeit a tiny one, sticking out from a wall in such a visible spot. I know for certain that it wasn't a prop either. It was a living tree. Trust me, growing up in a rural area gives you an ability to differentiate a real tree from a fake one. Also, I need to say that we have only a few castles in Finland, and the closest castle to Olavinlinna is Hämeenlinna Castle, over 300 kilometers away, so I have not visited any other castles in Finland. Not before, nor after. It's been decades since that incident, and I still don't know what it was. Was it a ghost tree? A glitch in a matrix we all saw, to which the tour guide didn't react for whatever reason? Or have I, without knowing, jumped timelines to a different reality where the rowan tree of Olavinlinna Castle was just a wimpy little thing, jerked down from its roots in a storm in the 1950s? I'm a 32-year-old female. I live in a beach town in Southern California, where I share a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate and her cat. Our town has a beach to one side and small mountains to the other, as well as several river bottoms. We are in the middle of our town, just off this busy street, behind a seedy motel. That motel is rumored to have been a stopping point of a serial killer in the 80s, who apparently liked to keep cut-up body parts in the bathtub. Between the motel and our apartment, there's an abandoned chained-up lot, which we refer to affectionately as Murder Lot. It has a lot of large, overgrown bushes as well as a few small trees. Many critters and even a vagabond or two could easily live there without anyone knowing. There's also a slim walkway leading from the lot and winding back between our building and the one behind us, and it passes by our bathroom window, which is too high for anyone to see into from one side or the other. It's about 6.5 feet off the ground. However, I always get an extremely uneasy feeling every time I have to pass by Murder Lot, especially at night. I am not much of a cannabis user, but I did accept a gummy from my roommate once when my body was extremely sore after a long weekend. That night, I dreamt of a skinwalker stalking me. I woke up the next day with my heart pounding, but I told myself it had to have been a result of the THC in my system. After that, I didn't dream about skinwalkers again. My roommate went out of town one night, so her cat slept in my room with me. She was sleeping, perfectly cuddled up. We were both startled awake at around 4 a.m. to a loud beep, beep, beep. It sounded like a smoke detector. I could have sworn it was going off in my room. As I sat up, I was hot and sweaty. That, mixed with the sound that woke me up, led me to believe that our building was on fire. Keep in mind, I had just woke up and was still gaining the ability to make sense of everything. However, the smoke detector was no longer going off by then. It shut off on its own. I got up to check things out, expecting to see flames outside, to see or smell smoke, something. When I walked into the living room and looked out the window, I saw nothing. Well, nothing except a pure white cat I had never seen before. This cat was statue still, gazing directly into Murder Lot. Something about it made me freeze up. I stared at that cat for a while, neither of us moving. Eventually, my roommate's cat approached me, exposing his belly at my feet. I looked down briefly to pet him, and when I looked back up, the white cat was gone. I stared out the window a little while longer, waiting for the cat to return, but it didn't. After I determined that our building was, in fact, not on fire, I went back to bed. I'd woke up hot and sweaty before, right? But now I could not seem to get warm enough the rest of the night. That didn't really make sense to me. The whole next day I had a weird, uneasy feeling. I haven't heard any phantom smoke alarms or seen any strange cats again, but I have since noticed the fence being bent towards the ground, enough for a cat or a very skinny person to crawl under. About a month later, around 8:30 p.m., I let my roommate know I would be taking a shower, in case she needed to pee before I occupied the bathroom. I did, however, leave the bathroom door unlocked, in case the cat needed to use his litter box in there. I was washing my hair when I heard a knock that I thought was coming from the bathroom door. I pulled the shower curtain back, and I called out, "What's up?" I heard in a strange version of my roommate's voice. I didn't think anything of it. We often did use silly voices when communicating. Thinking the cat must have needed to come in, I opened up the bathroom door. I expected to see the cat, but instead I saw nothing. I stood like that for a moment in the steamy bathroom, wondering what the heck just happened. I closed the bathroom door, my mind and heart still racing. What in the world was that? When I came out, I asked my roommate if she had knocked. She said no. I believed her. She was sitting exactly as she was before I'd left the room. I went to sleep that night, feeling weird, and woke up the next day feeling horrified, realizing the knock very well could have come from the bathroom window, not the door. The next and final incident happened some weeks after that, which now was only about 2 weeks ago. Just as I was lying down to go to sleep one night, I heard distressed shouting coming from an indiscernible distance from my window. The voice sounded not quite right. I listened for a while and the words played on repeat until he sounded like he was right at my street corner. I looked out the window and nothing. But the noise continued. Neighbors even came from their houses to investigate the sound. I called 911 to report a man in distress, and I waited. Eventually, the neighbors went back inside, but I kept watching. After a while, I did see something, or someone. Whatever it was, it crossed under a street lamp in the far distance. I don't know if they were limping or not, but the movements were quite strange. They were too far away for me to be able to make out any features, including their height. That was it for me. I decided I had done my civic duty enough for one night. So I turned out my light and did my best to go to sleep, while still keeping my ears open for anything strange. Ever since then, I haven't seen or heard anything, but the thought of those 3 incidents still cause anxiety and a pit in my stomach. I keep telling myself there's no way there's anything like a skinwalker in my sleepy beach town. But there's a small part of me that wonders if there could be. My story begins when I was in high school. I won't be using the actual names of people or locations in the story for privacy reasons. I was homeschooled off and on my whole childhood, but my story begins when I was entering the 10th grade. My folks were planning on enrolling me in a private school in our area, and to be honest, I hated the idea of it, right from the word go. But my mind didn't begin sending me urgent red flag signals until the day I visited the school, a week or so before I was to start. First of all, as soon as I saw the building, I remembered it was the same school I'd visited years back, when I was around 5 or 6 years old, and I'd felt so unsafe and uneasy there that I'd refused to stay even that one full day. I had to be picked up at lunch. So naturally, the place already came with bad vibes attached. I walked through the front doors and every cell in my body seemed to be screaming, "No, no, no." One of the staff showed us around and the whole place creeped me out for some reason that I couldn't really place. It just felt wrong. But how the classrooms and lunchroom made me feel was nothing compared to the deep, overpowering wave of dread I felt upon entering the gym. It wasn't like the room itself looked creepy or unsettling. In fact, I remember plastering on a fake smile and complimenting the principal on how beautiful the gym was, which wasn't a lie. It was a nice gym as far as looks went, but something about it made me feel so uncomfortable. So we saw the rest of the school, met some teachers and a few future classmates, and we left. No sooner had I gotten in the car, I said to my parents that I did not like it. I did not want to go there. Unfortunately for me, though, they weren't feeling what I was feeling, and were set on it. Fast forward a couple of weeks. Time for my first day. Words can't even describe the fear I felt that morning. I felt so out of place, like I wasn't supposed to be there. But as one does, I pushed on. Now, the handful of stories I will tell next happened sporadically throughout the 2 years I spent there. The first thing that comes to mind was all the papers I had to sign in order to be accepted. It went beyond the typical things, such as emergency contacts and previous grade averages. No, it slipped into more personal territory. Like, do you promise never to speak badly about the school, even outside school hours? And you must uphold the school image, even if no longer a student here. Yeah, that was strange. Wouldn't it be strange to you? I've always felt that if you have nothing to hide, you don't care what folks say about you. The strict dress code was odd too. I understand modesty, but myself and the other girls were scolded and written up for the most minute of things. Things like being told our skirts were too short. They were required to come to the middle of our knees, when really, they were plenty long enough. We weren't allowed to have any holes in the backs or sides of our shirts, no matter how small. And girls were not allowed to wear pants under any circumstances. Anything and everything was labeled as satanic too. Some of the most ridiculous examples that I can recall include country music, snakes, most films, dancing, and more. To say it was very cult-like is an understatement. Any incidents that occurred at the school were kept very quiet. I can remember asking classmates about things that had happened, on which I was foggy on the details, only for them to say they did not know if they were allowed to say anything about it. Students were also strictly prohibited from speaking about the teachers amongst each other, as these conversations, negative or not, were almost always shot down by some teacher there. So I'm hoping now that you understand the environment, we can move on to the creepy stuff. Almost all this happened in that darned gym. I hated that room with a passion, and my time there left me with many more questions than answers. First of all, the year I arrived, the gym teacher was new. She was nice enough, sure, but whenever I asked her, or anyone, how she ended up with the job, or why the old teacher had left, they would clam up and change the subject. I also remember that on one occasion, some of my classmates were reprimanded for scooting chairs across the gym floor, because it was newly replaced. Just trying to make conversation as the shy person I was, I turned to our teacher and asked, "Oh, cool, it looks pretty nice. When did they replace it?" And once again, the response I received was a nervous look and a quick change of subject. That was certainly weird, but I tried not to dwell on it. During my first year, I had gym class every other day, and as it is with most schools, we were required to change clothes before class. The changing rooms may very well have messed with me even more than the gym itself. I always had the overpowering urge to get in and get out as fast as I could, because I hated being in there. I always changed in a shower stall, and I remember noticing at some point that the shower heads were removed, as were the handles with which to turn on the water, and a wad of duct tape covered what was left of the spigot. It looked like the showers had been purposely rendered unusable. I thought about that a lot, but based on past experiences, I decided not to ask any questions. It would likely be a waste of time anyway. Several students left the school with no warning throughout my time there. No one wanted to say anything about it. Teachers answered questions vaguely and didn't allow many questions to be asked. The aura of misery was so strong in that building. When in a group, all the students seemed happy. But as soon as you were one-on-one with someone, they would tell you how much they hated it there. More than once, I overheard murmurings of, "This place is so haunted," or "This school is cursed." Things of that nature. I can't say I didn't believe it though, as a few months in, along with all the previously mentioned weirdness, I would sometimes see someone around the hallway corner right in front of me, and seconds later, as I rounded the corner myself, they were gone. I once could have sworn I heard screaming coming from the gym as I walked by the double doors. Assuming it was the kindergarten class, I peered through the little window to see if I could say hello to a little girl I'd befriended in that class. But the gym was empty. This happened a couple of times. Once when I was walking outside to take the day's trash out, and I passed by one of the always open gym doors, and I swear once more I heard screaming, yelling, talking. As I turned to walk back, the noises stopped, and the gym turned out to be empty. The little kindergartners that I looked after during their nap time, some days, often claimed to be scared of the lady, sometimes also called the shadow, and other terms like that. They always claimed to see it, or maybe her, walking by the door in the hallway, and every time I would go check, just to ease their little minds, no one would be there. Needless to say, the toxic environment about the place, combined with the paranormal heaviness of the atmosphere, did a number on my mental health, and I began to have nightmares and weird dreams. I had this reoccurring dream where the school was burning and I was trapped inside, and others that had a common theme of being trapped inside the school too. It got so bad that eventually, every time I passed an open door, a voice was pleading with me to run, to escape, to get out, to make a run for it. But anxiety kept me from acting on it. At some point, I even contemplated deliberately getting myself expelled just to escape the awful place. But of course, I just didn't have the guts. As spring began to bloom, and I prepared for the school's banquet, not a prom, they always made such a big deal of the fact it was a banquet and not a prom, I found myself scrolling through free movies on my phone. I ran across the film Carrie, and as a new horror fan, I decided why not. Folks, believe me when I tell you I have never been so scared in my life. If you've seen the movie, I'm sure you're now realizing the coincidental happenings at my school. My parents knew about all these oddities, and I seriously considered making them watch that movie right then and right there to prove my point. But I didn't. I figured they would call me crazy. I mean, it's a fictional film after all, right? Of course, it's only a movie, I convinced myself. But still, I felt the need to look into it more. Have you ever felt like you were being sent a message? Like God or the universe was just trying to tell you something, through some means? Well, that's how I felt, so I had to look into it. 2 days later, it was banquet time, and there I was, all decked out and scared out of my mind, but not saying a word. The banquet was held in the school's lunchroom, which was quite crowded. The gym would have been a better choice, for sure. Thinking back on Carrie, I decided to perform a little experiment. I walked over to one of my teachers, made some small talk, then asked, "Hey, why don't we do the banquet in the gym? Seems like it would be easier there." My teacher gave me an odd look and answered, "Oh, we used to, but..." Then she stopped, before abruptly changing the subject. All right, that's Exhibit A, I thought. I continued to mingle, and honestly, I had a decent time, not taking my severe anxiety into account, of course. After having a bite to eat, I made my move, asking the people at my table, "So, are we planning to elect a prom queen anytime soon?" I mean it when I say to you the whole room went silent for a second. It was like time itself had stopped for a moment, followed by a collective chorus of no's and absolutely nots. That was it. That sold it for me. The very moment the event was over, I booked it, not even bothering to attend the after party with my date. I went home, and my parents could see how shaken up I was. They took me seriously this time, finally. I'm not kidding when I tell you that I ran out those front doors and never came back. A rash decision, maybe. An odd but harmless series of coincidences, possibly. But I have learned in my life to never ever doubt your own gut feeling, especially when the signs were so loud and clear that something was wrong. And I'm so glad I did, because by fall the next year, the school was shut down, with no explanation, no word from anyone, no news coverage, and it was never spoken of again in our little town. Nobody ever knew exactly what happened, not that I know of, but for a school that had been there for over 50 years to just shut down that way, I felt fortunate that whatever it was, I'd been there to see it.